Oh, gee, I didn't know the camera was on. Hi, scholars. How you doing? Hope you're having a great week. Well, this is lesson number 5, and I got a little carried away there playing some of my favorite music, which you might guess is called jazz, right? Both Mr. John and I like to play jazz a lot, and a lot of the stuff that we're going to be showing you has to do with jazz, but a lot of people might ask, what is it? What is jazz? And the answer to that question is a little complicated because there's a lot of different kinds of music today that people will call jazz. If you ask 10 people what they think jazz is, they'll give you 10 completely different answers. There's a lot of people that have become sort of famous for playing jazz, but it started almost 100 years ago, and depending on what kind of jazz you like, you could be naming any number of people and any number of styles. Jazz has a lot of different styles, which I'm going to get into a little bit. But before that, I guess I need to talk about what exactly is jazz. And it's basically one of the only American musical art forms, which means that it's a type of music that started here in America, as opposed to classical music, which started in Europe. And there's many different other kinds of music. There's music from India, from Japan. There's all sorts of music from all over the world. Jazz is American music that started here, and now you can go anywhere in the world and hear anybody playing jazz because it's at one time was very popular, and it still is among a lot of musicians, but it doesn't really get as much play on Spotify or iTunes or just the kind of places where younger people would be listening to music. You don't hear too much of it. And I think you might think that jazz is kind of your parents' music or your grandparents' music. And I need to tell you that that is absolutely not true. There's a lot of younger people playing jazz, and I could even point to some examples right now. I'll put some clips in, some real short clips right now. Here's some really young people playing jazz. Take it away. Here's someone else I came upon on YouTube, a young person playing. Check this out.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to give your heart a song to sing, and then a case, but more than this, I wish you love.
And a really talented young person. He's about 25 or 26 years old right now, a guy named Jacob Collier. Some of you have maybe even heard of him or heard some of his stuff. He's doing some amazing work. I'm going to give you a real short clip of him. I encourage you, if you can, search out his music. He's all over YouTube. Great stuff. Check this out for a second.
I just wanna see how beautiful you are. Where you go, right? I know that you're a star. Thank you. Where you go, I follow. No matter how far. Say, if life is
Pretty good, right? Just so you know, that sax player is 9 years old. And he's French. He lives in France. And the guitar player, well, she's 6 years old, and she's from Japan. Jacob Collier, he lives near London. He's English. He's actually going to be on the road coming to the United States to do a tour, hopefully when all this stuff is done with. So I'm hoping we can all get to see him at some point. So I'm going to talk about a word now that's often used to describe what jazz is, and that word is improvisation. That's a fancy word which basically means making it up as you go along. So improvisation is something that everybody does every day when they're talking with their friends, right? You don't have a pad and a pencil and write out your thoughts and then think about it and cross out some words, write out some other words, and then talk to your friend, and then they don't stop and do the same thing. You guys are just talking back and forth. You're improvising. You learned how to talk, you learned the words, you're putting it together, and you're talking. Well, that's the same thing that jazz musicians do when they play their instruments. They're just speaking to each other and to the people that are listening. Now, improvisation exists not just in music or jazz. It exists in dance. There's a dancing style called contact improvisation, where the dancers don't really know what they're going to be doing. They just start, and they don't know where it's going to go, and it just takes shape. It takes its own shape. There's some types of painting is done with improvisation. A painter will just start with a blank canvas and just start painting, not really thinking about what's going to happen. And sometimes the result is great, sometimes it's not so great. But I also want you to know that improvisation in music is not limited to jazz. There's other types of music where there's improvisation. There's a lot of that in Indian music, for example, and there's other types of music where there's improvisation. So it's not just jazz. But a major part of jazz is improvisation. So what do you see when you go to see a typical jazz show with a band on stage playing? Well, first of all, a lot of the times it's instrumental, right? You don't see a vocalist. There's no singers. Although there's excellent jazz singers, there's also a lot of instrumental jazz bands, and a lot of jazz music is instrumental. So you'll see a band on stage, and maybe there's a sax player or a trumpet player, or maybe there's a guitar player, a drummer, a bass player. They're all up there, and they start a song, and they start playing it. And you hear them. They all play the song together. Then they get to the end of the song, and one of the people on that stage steps up. Maybe it's a sax player, and he just starts playing. And he could play for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Who knows? It's up to him. He's improvising. Then he steps back. Then somebody else comes up, maybe a trumpet player, or maybe it's the guitar player. And they do the same thing. They just start playing, and they are improvising. They're making it up as it goes along. So a lot of the times, everybody in the band will take turns. And this is called soloing. So each person goes and takes a solo. And then when they're all done, they all get together again and play the song all together. And now we all recognize the song because they're playing the melody of the song. And then it's over. It ends. And that's a typical jazz performance. But do you really know what's going on in between the beginning and the end, when those musicians are just improvising and playing? I'm going to explain this. So they're not just playing whatever they want, because that's not going to work, because you have a group of people, they're all playing together, they have to stay together. So how do they know what to do then? How do they know what notes to play? Well, I'm going to let you in on the jazz secret now. Don't tell anybody, all right? This is a little secret. When they first play the song and they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song, they start soloing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person to start soloing, they start playing. And then when they get to the end of the song and they're getting ready for the first person they just go back to the beginning of the song and they play the song over again. So that's pretty simple, right? But the difference is at this time, you don't hear the melody of the song. Now, do you remember our last lesson when I told you there's two parts? There's three parts: melody, harmony, and rhythm to music. And right now I'm just going to talk about melody and harmony. Remember I told you the melody is what people identify with, and they can hear that, and that tells them what the song is. The harmony are the chords underneath the melody that support the melody. So what happens in jazz is that when you're done playing the melody of the song and it's time to start soloing, you go back to the beginning of the song and you play the song over again. But instead of playing a melody, all you do now is play the harmony. So the harmony of the song starts over again, but now the soloist gets to play whatever they want on top of those chords, on top of the harmony, but the harmony stays the same. It's the same song played over again. And then when they get to the end of the song, guess what happens? Go back to the beginning again. And the soloist, who's ever playing their solo, they can choose to keep going, or maybe they feel, well, that's enough. I'm done. Time for the next person. So they'll step back, and then the next person will take a solo. Every time you go through the song, when you're soloing, it's called a chorus. So if I tell somebody, hey, why don't you take two choruses? That means they're going to improvise going through the song twice. Now, a lot of times, nobody really knows in advance how many choruses a soloist is going to take. If they're doing great, if they really feel like they're into it, they could keep going. There's times when soloists can go through the song 20 times. They can play 20 choruses, maybe even more. Soloists can keep going for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Most of the time it's not like that. People are generally courteous, and if there's a lot of musicians on stage and they're all waiting to take a turn, then each soloist will only play one or two choruses. But that's what's happening. They are playing through the song over and over again, but instead of playing the melody, they are playing whatever comes to their mind. Now, does that mean they can play anything that they want? What do you think? If you're hearing the chords of a song, don't you want to play something that's going to fit? You have to fit the chords that are being played, because there's usually a guitar player or piano player that's playing the chords throughout all the solos. So you have to know the chords, and you have to know the right notes to play on them. And then you're free to do your own thing, but you're always thinking about what the chords are. So I could take something very simple. This is not really a jazz song, but I'm going to just make it simple. And let's say, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? Okay, everybody plays the melody. Now it's time for the solos. So we go back to the beginning of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and we just play it over again. Only this time we're just playing the chords by themselves, and we're going to let the soloist make up a new melody. That's their solo. I would play maybe something like this. I don't even know what I'm going to play now. I'm just going to play. Okay. Well, that's not what I'd really call jazz, but I'm just showing you the principle of what jazz is. It's harmony where you get to make up a melody, and that's improvising. Okay, scholars, Well, I hope you have a better idea now of what exactly goes into a jazz performance and what you might see and hear if you ever see any musicians playing jazz. Now you'll know what's going on, right? So I'm going to leave you with one more thing now. If you remember at the beginning of this video, I was playing a little bit. Well, you might be able to tell that I was improvising there. I was making it up as I was going along. That's what we've been talking about this whole video. Now, I was making up a melody, but the chords I was playing belonged to a song, and they happen to belong to a very famous song called I Got Rhythm. This song was written around 1930 by a composer named George Gershwin, and he wasn't really a jazz musician. He was more of a classical musician, actually. But he wrote songs for the musical theater, and this is one of his more famous ones. And what happened is that gradually, jazz musicians really got to like the chord changes to this song. That's what we call the chords and the harmony of a song. We call them the chord changes. They didn't necessarily like the melody of I Got Rhythm, and I'm going to let you listen to the original I Got Rhythm song right now. You can check that out. Take it away. Okay, well, that's the song, and I play it in a different key than what you just heard it in, but you probably heard this melody. Right? That's the melody. Now you know from this video that there's harmony that goes along with the melody that jazz musicians use to solo on, and that would be. So what I was doing at the beginning was improvising on the chords of I Got Rhythm, which is what many jazz musicians have done for years. Not only do they improvise on these chords, but jazz musicians have written a bunch of songs based on those chord changes. So I'm going to give you one quick example right now. Here's a song that uses those chords, but it's not I Got Rhythm. So were you able to hear the chord changes? Did you recognize the chord changes as I Got Rhythm? Maybe and maybe not. That's okay. This is the kind of stuff that you learn by doing a lot of. So I'm going to sign off until next time. Keep listening. Check out Jacob Collier, okay? See you guys. Have a good week.